Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Williams, and this is another episode of Chide Study Press podcast, specialising in Chinese Australian history. And today, our bots will be discussing an article that I wrote many years ago now, in fact, way back in 2003, entitled "In the Tang Mountains We Have a Big House." I think you'll find it's a very interesting discussion that gives a good overview of the connections with the Qiaoxiang, that is to say the places of origin that people came from when they went overseas to places like California, Hawaii, and Sydney. In particular, we're looking at the Lungdu people of Zhongshan County, which is a kind of a case study, which of course I specialise in my book, Returning Home with Glory. But this article published in East Asian History, published by the ANU, in 2003 is a particular article. Again, Child Study Press hasn't republished this yet, but it will do so in the future. But for now, I'll just let the bots discuss this, and of course I'll come back at the end to provide a little bit of a summary. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we dig into a whole stack of sources and pull out those really crucial bits of knowledge for you.
That's the plan.
Today, we're diving into something fascinating, a whole century of connections across the Pacific. And maybe the best way to start is with this quote from a Mrs. Liang.
Oh, yeah, that's a powerful one.
Right. She lived most of her life in the U.S., but her family, they always planned to go back to Changshan in China. And her reason? So simple, but it says everything. Because in the Tang Mountains, we have a big house.
And that big house, whether it was, just a dream or a real building, it was always tied to their home place, the Qiaoxiang.
The Qiaoxiang. Let's unpack that a bit. It means the native land of someone who's away.
Exactly. And that concept, that pull of the Qiaoxiang, that's really the heart of what we're looking at today. We're sort of pulling back the curtain on these huge, often kind of invisible links.
Links that lasted a century, from the gold rush days, mid-1800s, all the way to 1949.
Right. Connecting the Pearl River Delta in China with places like Sydney, San Francisco, Hawaii, all over.
And what's really interesting is how this part of the story often gets missed. You read histories of Chinese people in the U.S. or Australia, and they're often framed as, like, threats or victims or maybe pioneers, but always within that country's story.
Yeah, the focus is very nation-state based. It tends to ignore these deep ties back home.
And funnily enough, Chinese history often does the same thing, just in reverse. It focuses on the big picture, the nation or the province.
Yeah, it misses the local level, the village level, where so much of this was actually happening.
So that's our mission today, right? To uncover that missing piece, that vital perspective, by zooming right in on one specific Qiaoxiang.
Longdu District. It's in Zhongshan County, Guangdong Province.
And why should you care about this? Well, because understanding the Qiaoxiang, it's not just extra detail.
No, it's fundamental. It helps you actually get why people living overseas did what they did. Their motivations went way beyond just dealing with prejudice or wanting citizenship.
It was this powerful, constant pull back to their roots, back to that big house.
That's it. The desire wasn't just about surviving abroad. It was about supporting family back home, planning to return, hoping to retire there, and making the place better. That was the engine driving these trans-Pacific lives.
So why did this get overlooked for so long? You mentioned the focus on nation-states in the West.
Yeah, that and, frankly, a lack of Chinese language sources being used by Western historians for a long time. They just couldn't see those connections as clearly.
And in China?
In China, the historical focus was usually higher up, national, provincial. The nitty-gritty of village life, these overseas ties, they just didn't get the same attention.
So let's get specific. Longdu District. Tell us about it.
Okay, so Longdu, it's a district, maybe 80 villages or so, inside Zhongshan County in Guangdong.
And it was a bit distinct.
Yeah, they spoke a non-Cantonese dialect, which set them apart a bit. And it was pretty populous, about 140,000 people around 1910. That's like 17% of the whole county.
Wow.
And crucially, it was known as a place with tons of overseas connections, partly because the land itself was hilly, not super fertile.
So people looked elsewhere for opportunities, a surplus population, as the sources put it.
Exactly. And these connections were everywhere. There's this great anecdote from a visitor in 1884.
Oh, yeah.
They reported walking through villages in Zhongshan, and people would just casually say hello in English or even Hawaiian.
No way. In the 1880s.
Yep. Shows you just how common it was. Even the county capital, Sheki, was apparently seen as quite wealthy, largely because of money coming back from merchants overseas.
Okay, so we've got the idea of the Qiaoxiang. We know Longdu was a hub. What was life like there in these villages tied so closely to faraway places?
Well, it varied hugely.
Yeah.
It really was a study in contrasts.
Give us an example.
Okay, take Qiaoxiang village. This is in the late 1930s, before the Japanese occupation really hit hard.
Yeah.
Sources call it a small, prosperous village. And listen to this list. A good school with over 330 kids, a reading room, a women's society, something called a National Skills Society.
Impressive.
Good transport to Sheki, street lights, a public granary for people in need, even monthly benefits for orphans and widows, a free medical clinic, and clean streets.
That sounds pretty idyllic almost, especially for rural China at that time.
It really does.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the only reality, not by a long shot.
Okay, so what's the contrast?
Let's look at Buktoy Village through the eyes of a teenager born in Hawaii who visited in the 1920s.
Okay.
She described life there as almost unbearable. Swarms of flies, mosquitoes, no real transport, houses crammed very near together.
Sounds rough.
Sanitation, sewage systems, basically non-existent. Most older people couldn't read or write. Water came from wells or springs. She literally wondered how she survived 9 months there.
Wow. That's a stark difference. It really shows how much depended on those overseas connections, maybe, or how well they were managed.
Exactly. The level of prosperity could vary dramatically from one village to the next, even within the same district.
And at the center of all this, whether the village was rich or poor, was the family. But a family structured around absence, right?
Absolutely. The men, husbands, fathers, sons, they'd be gone for years. Sometimes you'd have 2, even 3 generations away at the same time.
Which meant the women, the wives and mothers, were effectively running the show back home.
Totally. Raising kids, managing the household, basically holding everything together while waiting for money to arrive from overseas.
These were the Gold Mountain women, the Jinshan Po.
That's the term, yeah. And apparently you could often tell who they were.
How so?
By their appearance. They often wore jewelry, sometimes even gold pieces made from melted down U.S. gold coins sent back as remittances.
Really? That's specific.
And modern clothing. Some contemporary accounts, maybe a bit judgmentally, mention their fancy vocabularies and wasteful and arrogant manners.
Sounds like maybe some local resentment there. Or just observation.
Could be a bit of both. But it's important to look past the surface. That jewelry and modern dress might suggest leisure, but many accounts from the women themselves talk about boredom.
Right. It wasn't necessarily an easy life, even if the money was coming in. Which brings us to the remittances. That money was crucial, but it carried a heavy weight, didn't it?
Immense weight. We hear these heartbreaking stories. La Shilo mentioned her sister-in-law apparently went crazy when the money stopped coming.
Oh, wow.
Arthur Chang remembered his family being terrified when his father didn't send money for a while. You can imagine the fear.
Absolutely. And that other story, the courier, Lizier.
Oh, Mrs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He'd deliver money, and she'd cry, saying things like, "Seeing money arrive here is like cutting my heart with a knife. It is selling my man for money I'd rather not to have it."
Gosh, that just lays bare the emotional cost behind the whole big house dream.
It really does. It wasn't just economics. It was deeply personal, deeply emotional.
So when the men did come back, what was that like?
Usually pretty brief visits. A few months, maybe a couple of years at most, and often spent, well, kind of relaxing.
Taking a break from hard work overseas.
Yeah, handing out gifts, catching up, acting as messengers, carrying news and letters back and forth. They often gave off this impression of having made it, wealth, ease.
Which probably encouraged the next generation to think, hey, I should go too.
Exactly, it fueled the cycle. But there was a dark side to that too. Life overseas was dangerous.
Right. Not everyone came back alive.
No. The sources are clear. Many returns were just the bones of men who had died abroad. Like Lou Rubin's father, his family didn't even know he was dead for 3 years.
3 years. Unimaginable.
Just shows the distances and the difficulties in communication back then.
Yet, despite all the long absences, the dangers, marrying one of these Gold Mountain fellows was still seen as a good thing.
Often, yes. The potential for financial security was a huge draw. And sometimes, fascinatingly, the men brought back non-Chinese wives.
Really? Like who?
Well, there's an account by a Reverend Damon in the 1880s. He saw Hawaiian women in Qiaoxiang, dressed in Chinese clothes, looking well and healthy.
That must have caused a stir.
Probably. And another common thing was sending children born overseas sometimes to non-Chinese mothers back to the Qiaoxiang.
Why? To connect them with their roots?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To be educated, learn more Chinese customs. Apparently, they might cause a bit of commotion initially, but the sources say they generally manage to fit in.
So let's talk about the money itself, the remittances. What did they actually do with it?
Well, the main goal was supporting the family, basic needs. One study figured about 58% went to that.
Okay, makes sense. What about the rest?
A big chunk, maybe 20%, went into building houses. That big house wasn't just a metaphor. And another 15% or so for big family events, weddings, funerals, that sort of thing.
And these houses, they started to look different, didn't they?
They really did. At first, maybe just adding an extra window was seen as foreign. But by the 1920s, you start seeing these distinct foreign houses, the Yanglu.
What were they like?
Often 2 or more stories high, built in styles that weren't traditional Chinese. Or sometimes you'd see a traditional house, but with a dialu attached.
A dialu? What's that?
Basically a fortified watchtower. Kind of grim, but it tells you something about security concerns, mainly bandit protection.
Right. We'll come back to that. And some families went all out.
Oh yeah, the super wealthy ones like the Kowak family, favorites for department stores, or the Ma family. They built entire mansions in foreign styles. Really changed the look of the villages.
But it wasn't just about private houses, was it? People donated to the community, too.
Absolutely. That was a huge part of it. Money went into building health clinics, schools, putting up streetlights, funding reading rooms, constructing bridges.
Sort of like the traditional role of the gentry, the local elite.
Exactly like that. And returnees, especially after the Qing dynasty fell in 1911, increasingly stepped into that role. They had the money and increasingly the influence.
Let's talk healthcare first. What kind of clinics?
We see examples like the Guangrencheng Yiju Clinic in Longtuwan Village. It offered free medicine and had both traditional Chinese herbalists and Western-trained doctors.
Wow, both. That's quite progressive.
Yeah, and there were specific groups formed just to raise money for clinics, like one called the Long Life Association.
But you said education was the big one.
Definitely. That seems to have been the most popular and probably most impactful type of donation.
How did it change things?
Well, simply put, more kids went to school, including significantly more girls. And they built new schools, modern schools.
Do we have numbers on that?
There are some figures from Taishan County, which is nearby and similar. They went from just 5 schools in 1850 to 47 by 1911.
That's a huge jump.
It really is. And remittances made it possible for girls like Peng Kicking to learn to write, which meant she could stay in touch with family overseas directly. That's a massive change.
And it went beyond village schools.
Yeah, there was a growing trend, if the family could afford it, to send kids on for higher education. Canton, Hong Kong, Shanghai, sometimes even overseas, to the U.S. or Japan. It really was an educational revolution fueled by this overseas money.
Okay, so houses, community projects, education. What else did the money go into?
Land. After building a house, buying land was often the next priority.
Why land specifically? Status.
Status, security, yeah. There was a strong belief that wealth takes form in owning land. And the value proposition was incredible.
How so?
Think about this. In the 1930s, earning enough to buy 1 mu of land that's about 1/6 of an acre might take you 8 years of work in Guangdong.
Okay.
But in Canada, you could potentially earn that same amount in just 5 days.
5 days? That's insane.
It shows you the sheer economic power of those overseas earnings when translated back home.
And beyond land, what about bigger projects, infrastructure?
Yes, definitely. People invested in building roads. Often these were private toll roads, which sometimes caused arguments, as you can imagine.
I bet.
But they made a difference. And bus lines. They started connecting places. The trip from Longdu to Sheki, the capital, apparently went from 2 or 3 hours down to just 20 minutes.
Huge change. What about businesses?
Lots of those too. Banks popped up, stores, all sorts of commercial ventures. Big Hong Kong companies like Wing On and Sincere even opened branches in Sheki.
Catering to all these families with remittance money.
Exactly. The main streets filled up with pawn shops, gold shops, businesses designed to serve people with cash to spend or assets to manage.
But it wasn't all success stories, was it? You mentioned investment failures earlier.
No, definitely not. A lot of these investments, especially maybe the bigger, more ambitious ones like electricity plants, failed.
Why?
Various reasons. Corruption was one that, quote, about too many people get free lights. Kind of hints at that.
Right. Siphoning off resources.
Plus, the general political instability in China during that whole period made long-term investment really risky. Someone like Li Yipfei explicitly said as much.
So what was the result of those failures?
Well, crucially, it meant that Qiaoxiang often remained dependent on that outside income. The local economy didn't become fully self-sustaining.
Ah, so the failures actually reinforced the need for people to keep going overseas.
In a way, yes. It perpetuated the cycle. And this whole dynamic, the money flowing in, the investments, the community projects, it really started shifting power within the villages.
How did that work?
Well, after 1911, the old imperial system and its local gentry class were gone. This opened up space.
Space for the returnees.
Exactly. By buying land, by funding schools and clinics, things officials or the old gentry might have done, they gained status. They went from being, peasants who left to becoming a respected class.
So money bought influence.
Pretty much. By the 1920s and 30s, these returnees were often key figures, village elders. People sought their advice and definitely their money.
Did they get involved politically?
Sometimes directly. We hear about the Honolulu Chinese Chamber of Commerce wiring the Guangdong government, asking for troops to protect villages. That's diaspora influence reaching right back.
And you mentioned those magazines, the Qiaoxiang.
Yeah, those are important too. They were magazines for people overseas, often organized at the village level, partly by returnees.
What was their purpose?
To keep people abroad connected, informed about village news, encourage donations, and, let's be honest, probably also to reinforce the status of the returnees who were running things back home.
Did returnees take on actual government roles?
Sometimes, yeah. Joe Soon, the guy who donated the school in Long Tuan, he actually became its principal for a while.
Huh. Hands-on.
And others got official positions. Young Quang Tat retired from running a store in Honolulu and became the magistrate, the top official of Qiaoxiang County.
Wow. That's quite a leap. But you also mentioned corruption.
Right. It wasn't all altruism and civic duty. One Hawaii-born observer noted that returnees often got government jobs and just, quote, follow the old system of squeeze. So it was complex. Influence, service, but also sometimes graft.
Which leads us into some of the dangers and downsides of all this wealth flowing in. You mentioned banditry earlier.
Yeah, that became a really serious problem, especially in the 1920s and 30s. Bandits specifically targeted families known to have overseas connections. They knew they had money or could get ransom money sent.
So kidnapping was a real threat.
Oh, absolutely. People visiting home got snatched. Lee Man Duck, who owned a shop in Sydney, was kidnapped. Wang Chok-ton, son of a Honolulu bank president, same thing.
Terrifying. How did people respond?
They built defenses. Those Diaolu, the watchtowers or gun towers, became common. Villages organized patrols. People armed themselves.
Like a militia?
Sort of. Hangmei Village apparently had a whole system warning gunshots, sirens, even cannons to scare off bandits.
Cannons? They weren't messing around.
No. And it wasn't just bandits, there was local extortion, too, these black ticket fees. Basically local toughs demanding protection money from farmers, threatening their harvests if they didn't pay.
So you could be squeezed from multiple sides.
Pretty much. Victor Gao's uncle apparently built himself a fortified station with a moat and cannons just to protect himself. That's how bad it could get.
And what about the impact on families themselves? All this separation, the money pressures. Did it cause problems within families?
It definitely could. Despite the strong emphasis on family, the lifestyle put huge strains on relationships.
Like what?
You see reports in Changshan newspapers about disputes over land. A wife selling off land while her husband was away, maybe for a lover. Or widows not getting support from the wider family.
Ooh.
And sometimes really dramatic things like sons shooting their fathers over arguments about spending limits on remittances. So it wasn't always harmonious.
And what about the kids growing up in this environment, particularly the young men?
That was another issue. In an economy so geared towards consumption, funded by outside money, there weren't always many meaningful local opportunities for the younger generation.
So they had money, maybe some education, but not much to do.
Right. And the sources mention problems like opium use, gambling, prostitution becoming issues in some areas.
Lack of purpose.
Perhaps. And there was this social stigma. It was seen as a disgrace if an educated son ended up working in the fields, which, ironically,
Just push them towards going overseas themselves.
exactly, it fed right back into the cycle, keeping the whole system going generation after generation.
So this whole system, built on these overseas links, was incredibly productive in some ways, but also quite vulnerable.
Deeply vulnerable. Things like new immigration laws overseas or the Great Depression, they could really hurt. But the biggest test, the thing that really shattered the system, was the Japanese invasion.
Starting in 1937, and especially the occupation of Hong Kong from 41 to 45.
Yes, Hong Kong was a key hub for sending money and people back and forth. When the Japanese took it, that lifeline was essentially severed.
What was the impact on the Qiaoxiang on Longdu?
Devastating. Remittances stopped. Visits stopped. Food shortages became severe. There was mass starvation. Changshan County's population reportedly dropped significantly. People were begging in the streets.
And that prosperous village, Qia's?
It declined massively during the occupation. Gambling, opium became common. The school, that symbol of progress, was destroyed. Japanese soldiers apparently burned 40,000 books there.
40,000 books. Just tragic. A total collapse.
For Qiaoxiang, yes. But importantly, it wasn't uniform devastation everywhere.
Oh, how so?
Well, some villages fared differently. Shaanxi, another village, actually kind of thrived for a while.
Thrived during the occupation. How?
It was located right on the border between Japanese-controlled and free zones, so it became a trading hub if people avoided occupied Sheki.
Wow, okay. Unexpected consequences.
And another village, Shijiao, apparently got through relatively okay because it had good local leadership and was always more reliant on its own farming than on remittances. It even saw some prosperity from traders passing through.
So even in that crisis, the local specifics really mattered.
They always did. But overall, the war years were catastrophic for the Qiaoxiang system.
What happened after the war ended in 1945?
There was a rush of people trying to return, trying to reconnect. Many found terrible loss, family members dead, homes destroyed.
Was there an effort to rebuild?
Yes, immediately. New donations started flowing in from overseas again, funding the rebuilding of roads, bridges, hospitals, and, tellingly, even more defensive towers.
Still worried about security, even after the war.
Seems so. For some people, the aim was clearly to pick up where they left off, to restore the Qiaoxiang links as they were. But others, having seen the devastation, decided to take their families out of China, heading overseas themselves.
A turning point for many, perhaps?
It seems like it. But the system itself, the Qiaoxiang connections, proved remarkably resilient. They survived the war, the occupation.
But they didn't last forever in that form, did they? What was the final curtain?
1949.
Damn.
The establishment of the People's Republic of China. New government policies in China, combined with changing policies in destination countries like the U.S. and Australia, gradually brought that century-long era of the Qiaoxiang as it had existed to a close.
Wow. What a huge story. So let's try and pull this together. This deep dive into Longdu, what has it really shown us?
I think it's shown just how deeply these trans-Pacific connections shaped everything in the Qiaoxiang. Family life, health, education, the economy, local politics. It was all interwoven with these overseas ties for generations.
It was a double-edged sword, wasn't it? Huge benefits, development, opportunity.
But also vulnerability, dependence, social tensions, real dangers. It created these incredibly complex communities.
It really brings us back to Mrs. Liang and her big house in the Tang Mountains.
Absolutely. Whether that house was a physical mansion built with remittance money or just the idea of home, understanding the Qiaoxiang, that enduring connection, that motivation is just crucial.
It takes us beyond just seeing the diaspora story as one of hardship or assimilation in a new country.
Exactly. It reveals this whole other dimension, this constant dialogue between here and there, this powerful pull of the native place. It's a much richer, more complete picture.
So the final thought for you, our listener, as you think about this history, maybe consider how global connections still shape communities and lives today.
Yeah, people still move, send money back, dream of improving or returning to a native land, whatever that means to them now. It might be a physical place or maybe a family legacy or a cultural identity they're trying to maintain across borders.
So the question is, what are those deep, maybe sometimes invisible connections shaping the world around you? What are the big houses driving people's dreams and ambitions across borders in our own time?
Something to think about.
Well, thank you very much for listening to that. I think that was a very good summary of the article and the links with the Qiaoxiang and what people were going through over the century, roughly from the gold rushes of the 1850s right through up to 1949. Of course, I don't wish to imply that in 49 everything ended. In fact, the links continued on, but they evolved after that and took on a different nature as a result of the new government's policies and a variety of other factors, not just within China but also within the white settler nations such as Australia and America, who began to change their attitudes. And that story is taken up in other areas, and I'll perhaps we'll be discussing that in the future. So as usual, Chai Study Press, if you want to get in touch, write to childstudypress@gmail.com. That's child, CHILDESTUDYPRESS @gmail.com. Child Study Press is an anagram, a prize to anyone who guesses what child study is an anagram of. The only hint I'll give you is it relates to history and historians. So this is number 14 in-house series, mostly on Chinese Australian history, but I reserve the right to do a podcast on any topic I feel like on occasion. So I've done one already on Magistrate Thomas Cook of Dungog in the past, who had nothing to do with Chinese in Australia, and I'll probably do some similar ones in the future, though I think the few that I've got planned in the near future will all be related to Chinese Australian history one way or another. So happy to get your feedback if you want to write to that address, or make any other comments. As usual, this will be up on Podbean, but also at YouTube. Okay, this is Michael Williams signing off, and I hope you enjoyed.